Okay, so we got 12 games this weekend. We actually are 1 week away from the international break, but MLS is one of those league where, for whatever reason, even in the international break, there is still going to be games, and I believe next week we're going to have 5 games that is going to be happening during international break. There's going to be 7 games that's going to happen on Saturday, and there's going to be 5 that's going to happen on Sunday. So what I'm gonna end up doing is probably gonna do something similar to what I did last week, where I'll review the Saturday games on Saturday night, and then I'll review the Sunday games on Sunday night. Although this Saturday, unlike last Saturday where I was able to get home very early, this time it's not gonna be the case. I'll probably might end up going home at 11, and I have to do the review at midnight. But either way, let's take a look at this week game, and all these games are going to be taking place on Saturday. We'll start with, once again, the 10 a.m. game. I mean, seriously, MLS, could you not put so many 10 a.m. game my time for every match week now? I mean, I understand the fact that the reason why there's so many morning games, well, for most folks in the East Coast, it's like early afternoon game. But the reason why there's so many of these kind of early game is because since the weather is still very cold in the East Coast, the only way that they can play the game without just have to like play in sub below zero temperature is just play in the daytime. But it's kind of annoying the fact that I have to wake up early to watch some of these games when I don't usually wake up very early to just watch these games. But we'll start with Chicago taking on Seattle. Chicago, of course, drew 1-1 against Orlando at home, while the Sounders outscored their opponents 6-1 so far and have won their first 2 games. In terms of injuries and suspension, guys that is going to be out is going to be Reynolds II for Chicago. And Katai, of course, is going to be questionable coming into this game. And also Corrales is going to be suspended in this game because of the red card that he got last week. And for the Sounders, they have no injuries or suspension. Although today, I just read an article talk about how Disco has just fined one of their player. It was Victor Rodriguez for simulation. And, you know, when I look at the incident where Victor Rodriguez basically dived to try to win a penalty against the Rapids, yeah, that's definitely simulation, which is a good call. But here's what I'm kind of annoyed about Disco about this, is that if you're going to award one player that make kind of like a simulation, and just if you're going to find one player that dive in a game, why don't you find the other player that also dive in this game? And the other player, as everybody probably know by now, who should be fined by Disco, is Corey Bear from that RSL versus Vancouver game, where it was clear that he dived, and yet he received nothing. This is why I've been talking about how pro and the referee organization that we have has been so incompetent. It's the same thing about Disco. The disciplinary committee is just being so inconsistent in terms of finding these guys that, I just feel like they got to do something about that. They cannot just decide to find one guy by him just kind of make a blatant dive, and then they don't do anything for another guy that basically make the same blatant dive. So yeah, that is something that Disco's got to fix, which most likely it's not going to happen, because I said the same thing about Pro last year. They still haven't really done much at all. But going back to this game, well, for the Sounders, this is the first time that they are going on the road. And what is going to be difficult for them in this game is that they are playing in a very early game. I mean, it's 10 o'clock in the morning in Seattle when they play in this game. So I'm not quite sure if the players are going to try to adjust their body clock for this. I'm not sure if that's going to affect them, but it's going to be interesting to see if the Sounders can get off to their best start since the expansion year, or we'll see if Chicago can basically maybe finally get a win in this game. I mean, they're about how I said Katai is questionable. If he's going to play in this game, then it will definitely provide a little bit more on the attacking end. Although, one thing I am very concerned about Chicago coming in this game is the defense. And knowing Seattle has been just so good on the attack the first two games, if their defense is not very good, this could get really ugly. Next up, Columbus, who are playing against Dallas. Both teams are 1-1 and 0, and both teams actually won 2-0 last week. With the Crew going on the road against New England and beat them 2-0, while Dallas won 2-0 at home against the Galaxy. Injuries and suspension for Columbus. Valenzuela, obviously he's out for the season with a torn ACL, and Nicholas Hansen is going to be also out for this game. And for Dallas, there is no injury and suspension that they are suffering. And this is going to be an interesting game because this is a game between two first-year head coach for their respective club and two young American-based kind of head coach with Caleb Porter against Luchi Gonzalez. And yeah, definitely it's going to be a very interesting kind of match. I would say maybe Columbus might be favored in this considering the fact that they're playing at home, but from what I'm seeing with Dallas for the first 2 weeks, it looks like they have really got, like, you know how Dallas is a team that always goes to look at their academy and basically bring in those players from the academy pipeline, and then once they get into the starting 11, they usually do very well. Well, these first two games have kind of proven that, and now I kind of regret saying that Dallas should probably not make the playoffs this season in my prediction, because the way they look in the first two games, it looked like they could potentially make the playoffs again. Next up, Houston. They play against the winless Whitecaps. The Whitecaps, I believe, is one of the 3 teams that is currently winless right now in MLS. Well, Houston, of course, have won 1 and draw 1. Last week, they won against Montreal, a come-from-behind victory against the Impact at home, as they won 2-1. While Vancouver, of course, lost 1-0 to RSL, although it was a pretty injustice kind of loss for them because the goal that they gave up and the penalty that was called against them should have never been a penalty. But you know, it's going to be interesting to see if the Whitecaps can maybe bring into, like in the last game, they definitely showed some improvement, and that it started to show that Marc Dos Santos might have started to get this squad figured out, and the chemistry level of this team is started to go very well. And you know, they're playing against a Houston side that, you know, they lost against Tigres in the midweek, but they did play in a very kind of hard-fought game, so they're going to be maybe a little bit confident heading back home, knowing the fact that they did play very well against Tigres and that they are playing at home, which is a place that they usually do very well. In terms of injury and suspension for Houston, players that is going to be out for this game is Bird, Cabeza, and McHugh. Questionable in this game are Beasley and Figueroa, and for Vancouver, they have no injuries. So the Dynamo, they are kind of hitting a little bit of an injury bug. I'm assuming Beasley is probably not going to play in this game because he did came off with an injury in the last game against Tigres, and it will also be interesting, what does Wilmer Cabrera do with this game? Does he decided to put in the same starting, well, not the same starting 11, but put the starters that he did against that Tigres game and then basically just keep them in the starting 11 for this one? Or do they go with kind of a weak kind of squad? I mean, I'm not saying Vancouver is a team that they think that it can just be an automatic 3 points because they're one of the weakest team in the league, but it'll be interesting to see whether or not if Cabrera decided to maybe use a little bit squad rotation, maybe bring in some of the players that started in that game against Tigres and play them in the second half, or even just start them and then maybe sub them out so that they don't get tired out by the end of the game. Next up, so the Red Bulls, they of course play the other teams that is winless, and one of the other 3 teams that is winless this season, and that of course is my Quakes team. So the Red Bulls of course are one of the 2 teams that did not play in week 2. So remember how last week I said TFC is one of those 2 teams that didn't play? Now I found out that the Red Bulls were the other team that did not play last week. Well, the Quakes, of course, lost 3-0 at home against Minnesota. Injury report and suspension. The Red Bulls have 2 players that is going to be probable coming into this game. Kamar Lawrence and Brian White. I'm assuming most likely both of them would play because they're probable. Well, for the Quakes, Partida, of course, is still out with a torn ACL, and I think the Red Bulls are probably going to go with a backup squad. They're probably going to play the kits again, considering the fact that, they pretty much put their starters against Santos Laguna, and they did not do very well against them. And the confidence of that team probably is very low right now. So if that is the case, then why not put your kits in? And so far, the Red Bulls have been proven, alongside with FC Dallas, is that when you put your kits in and when you put some of the best players from your academy into your team, then they are going to be very successful. And yeah, I'm genuinely nervous about this game. I mean, I said it before, how unless if Almeida can do something what he did a year ago when he was able to get a 0-0 result against the Red Bulls with his Chivas team that ultimately went on to CCL final and won the whole competition, I just don't see how the Quakes are going to get anything out of this game with the way that, the squad is still not very good right now, and that Almeida is still clearly trying to implement his philosophy into this team. Yeah, it's going to take a while for the Quakes to be good, and this really looks like a mismatch on paper. On one hand, you have probably the best team in the league from last season against the worst team in the league last season. So you probably would know what's going to happen in this game. But let's hope that the Quakes just don't get absolutely annihilated in this game. I mean, even if we lose 1-0, if I see that there's some progress with this team, if I see that there are players that look promising in this game, then I'll be happy. I mean, we might not get the result, but at least we're showing some progress. Next up, Orlando. They play against Montreal. Orlando, of course, is a team that are winless, but they drew their first 2 games, although you could argue both of those games they should have got a win, especially the last one. Well, they play against the Impact, who of course lost that last game against Houston. Of course, Orlando drew 1-1 to the Fire in a game that they gave up a 94-minute equalizer to the Fire while they were up a man in that game. For Orlando, in terms of injuries and suspension, Akindele and Sane is both out for this game. And for Montreal, Kruliki is going to be out for this game for them. And, when you look at this matchup, I would say that, for Orlando, they want to really think about maybe getting a win. And they know that this is, whenever Orlando City is at this time of period, usually this is the time of the period that they are very successful, until you find out once the month turns to May or even in June, that's when this team kind of just collapse. Well, for Montreal, obviously they'll be very disappointed the fact that they didn't get at least a point against Houston. And when I look at this now, maybe Montreal could potentially beat Orlando City. I mean, Orlando City in these first 2 games, they definitely have shown some improvements, but we'll see if they can take down Montreal, and that this is an Impact team that should be a team that I don't think a lot of people should take them very lightly, and that this could be a team that will basically fly under the radar throughout the year and kind of really surprise a lot of people when they do make it to the playoffs. Next up, DC. They play against RSL. So DC, of course, drew 0-0 against NYCFC on the road, which is the first 0-0 draw of this season. Well, RSL, of course, won 1-0 at home against Vancouver, but it was a very controversial win in that game. In terms of injuries and suspension, DC, of course, have Orel Fisher, Odell Etsem, and Edwards Jr. is out for this game. While for RSL, Allen, of course, is out for the year with a knee injury, while Justin Glad is still recovering from that toe injury. So both of those guys are going to be out for this game. And, I think DC is probably going to going to get a win in this game, considering the fact that, one, this is at Audi Field, which means that usually when they're playing at Audi Field, it's an automatic win for DC. And, in the last game, they didn't really play very well, and maybe a lot of that has to do with the fact that they were playing against NYCFC at Yankee Stadium, and when you're a road team that you're playing at Yankee Stadium, it's always going to be tough because of the weird field dimension and also the turf in that last game. I know I didn't mention it in the review last week, but that turf at Yankee Stadium was just god awful. It was like, it wasn't even green at all. It was all kind of brown up, kind of like when you see the Packers play late in the season, and that how their turf at Lambeau Field usually kind of goes brown because it gets very cold up there. That's what happened at Yankee Stadium, and that is just absolutely unacceptable in terms of a condition for an MLS game to play. And I'm just hoping that eventually Don Gabbard's got to do something about this situation with NYCFC playing at Yankee Stadium, because it's clear that there's no way in the world that they should be still playing at Yankee Stadium, and I cannot believe how they still haven't figured out that stadium issue after they've been in the league for now 5 years. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. But going back to this game, like I said, with DC, I think they're probably going to get a win in this game, considering the fact that they're good at Audi Field, and they're playing against an RSL team that, they won last week, but it wasn't a convincing win, and they didn't really look that good. And knowing RSL do not do well on the road like what they did last season, this is going to be a really tough game for them. But yeah, either way, now I'm going to switch board and look at the other 6 games that's going to happen this week. Okay, so the last game on Saturday is between the depleted Galaxy versus Minnesota. Now, the reason why I say it's the depleted Galaxy is because look at the injuries list that they have, and look at the guys that is going to be out for this game. Perry Kitchen, Jorginho, Zlatan, and Alessandrini is all out for this game. So basically, their entire attack is pretty much completely wiped out coming into this game, and they are playing against a Minnesota team that is just red hot right now. The Galaxy, of course, lost 2-0 to FC Dallas away, while Minnesota has won 2 straight road games for the first time in their MLS history. The only guy that they are going to be missing in this game is Kevin Molino, but with the way that their attack is, with Molino back, he might not even be a guaranteed starters. I remember when Minnesota had Molino and he used to be a guarantee kind of starters, but knowing the fact that now they got guys like Quintero, Rodriguez, and Ibarra just firing on all cylinders, this team is a real dangerous kind of team. And against a Galaxy team that, as I said, they're depleted. They have nobody on attack. I don't know who exactly they're going to be playing striker in this game. Although, one thing with the Galaxy being this depleted is that they get a chance to maybe start out some of the reserve and get a chance to give maybe Efrain Alvarez his first start in MLS. I think in the last 2 games he's been coming off the bench. Well, now with the fact that that he's a very talented kind of player, and I know he's only 16 years old and he should be playing in the USL now more than actually starting or even getting minutes in MLS, but knowing how talented he is, why not? Why not throw him into the deep water? I mean, you don't really have any, he's probably your most decent player on the bench in terms of that attack. Why not throw him into the deep water and start him in this game? But in many ways, Minnesota, they have a good chance to make it 3 in a row. And I know that people will say, well, Minnesota have been having a very easy road trip. They play against Vancouver, a team that was on a rebuild. They play against the Quakes, who they are just bad in general. And now they're playing a depleted Galaxy team. And even if they win this, it's too... They're facing a lot of easy team. You can't really say that this proved that they might make the playoffs. No. it's not Minnesota's fault, the fact that they have an easy schedule, and it's not Minnesota's fault that the fact that they're playing against the Galaxy that is missing their big starters. At the end of the day, if Minnesota can actually win these first 3 games, yeah, they are for real to me. Like, this team, now winning 3 games in a row to start the season and doing it on the road is something that I think a couple of years ago or even last year it would be unthinkable if you're Minnesota. Like, if you ask the Minnesota fans and you tell them that they can win on the road to start the season on the road and win 3 games in a row, they would say that you're just crazy. There's no way that is going to happen. But here we are. Minnesota has a chance to do that, and with them getting these wins on the road and knowing the fact that they still haven't played a home game yet, and we know that they're going to definitely be very good at home this season, especially opening that new stadium in April. Yeah, this team could potentially make the playoffs. But next up, NYCFC. They play against the other LA team, that is the LAFC. NYCFC, of course, drew their first 2 games, while LAFC won their first 2 games. And as I mentioned before, NYCFC drew 0-0 against DC at home, while LAFC had won 4-1 against the Timbers at home. In terms of injuries and suspension, NYCFC questionable in this game is Tajari Shradi, while LAFC, Guido and Beitashour is going to be out for this game, and the questionable guy that could potentially start in this game is Andre Horta. LAFC certainly is one of the hottest team in the league, and probably you could argue they are the best team so far in the league, but now they have to go on the road for the first time, and they play against NYCFC, which I just mentioned how NYCFC, it's a place that it is very hard to get a result on the road, mainly because of how bad that field is. And I have a feeling that field is going to be literally like what happened last week, where it's just brown and stuff like that. And we'll see if LAFC can make some adjustment and maybe find a way to deal with those issues. And for NYCFC, you do not want to start your season with 3 games without a win. As I mentioned before, the longer NYCFC is going to struggle, which they have looked in the first 2 games, the more pressure Dominic Torren is going to feel, and the harder that seat is going to get toward him. Next up, Cincinnati. They play against the Timbers, and this is probably the most anticipated game and the game of the week this match week, because Cincinnati is going to be playing their first ever home game at Nippur Stadium, and apparently they have sold out for that game. The last time I heard, they're almost sold out to this game, but I think I read today that they officially have sold out their stadium for this upcoming game against the Timbers and their first ever home game in MLS. Cincinnati, of course, are coming off of a historic draw against Atlanta, getting their first ever point in MLS with a 1-1 draw, while Portland lost 4-1 against LAFC. Injury report, Ivech and McIntosh is the guys that is going to be injured and not going to be playing for Portland in this game, while for FC Cincinnati, the guy that is not going to be playing for this game is going to be McCaughlin, but questionable is going to be Kakuta Mane and Titan, and certainly I'm assuming probably Mane is going to be playing in this game because he was really good with Cincinnati in the last game. And when you look at this game, Cincinnati, they certainly will be very upbeat about this game, and they will definitely want to get their first ever win in their MLS history in front of a sold-out crowd at home. But Portland is a team that is, they haven't been very good in the first 2 games, but they are definitely not going to look at this game and say that they're gonna not get any result. I mean, even though I know this is going to be a hostile environment that Portland is going to heading into, they are desperate to try to get something going, because it looked like right now, with the way the Timbers are right now, it looked like it's going to be a repeat of what happened last season, where they struggle out of the gate. And the biggest problem right now for Portland is the defense. Now, the good news is Cincinnati does not have a good attack. So, maybe at the end of this game, I think if Portland and if guys like Valeri can basically turn it on for Portland and carry this team, then I think they can definitely come out of Cincinnati as the party pooper and basically get something out of this game. But then again, like I said, Cincinnati, they're heading into this game with a lot of confidence after getting that draw against Atlanta, and they also have 37,000 people that is going to be backing them to try and get their first ever victory in MLS. Next up, speaking of Atlanta, they play against Philly. So Atlanta, of course, are winless so far in the season. They have 1 draw and 1 losses, but they did win against Rayados during the midweek CCL game, although they did get eliminated in that game too because they need to score 3 goals against Monterrey, which they didn't do that. While the Union, they are winless too, but they have not even got a draw in this game. They have lost their first 2 games. Atlanta, of course, drew 1-1 against FC Cincinnati, as I, of course, mentioned a couple of seconds ago. While Philly, of course, lost 2-0 against SKC. Injury, Fidel Escobar is still out for Atlanta, while for Philly, as I mentioned in the news of the week, Pedro Santos will be out for about 4 weeks with, I believe, a thigh injury. Fabinho, Casper are also going to be joining him in terms of the players that is going to be out for the Union. And for suspension, Marco Fabian, of course, will not be playing this game because he picked up a red card in the last game. And the fact that he did not get fined for stomping an SKC player in that last game, just another evidence of how inept and incompetent Disco really is. But when you look at this game, Atlanta, they definitely, they didn't get able to move on into the semifinal of CCL, but they did beat Rayados and was actually the first team to beat Rayados this season, and hopefully that will give them a little bit more confidence heading into this game. I mean, I wouldn't say they play excellent in that Monterrey game, but they definitely have more confidence, and certainly it seems like there's more purpose for them than they have been throughout the first couple of games. And now they're playing against a Union team that is very depleted. This is a good chance for them to get their first win of the season, and I think they definitely are going to get their first win of the season in this match against the Union. Next up, TFC. They play against the New England Revolution. TFC, of course, one of the 2 teams that did not play in Week 2, while the Revs, of course, lost 2-0 at home against Columbus. In terms of the injuries report, TFC has no injuries, while for New England, Farrell, of course, will be out for this game. And, TFC, they have a very long break coming into this game. Unlike where the Red Bulls didn't play last week, at least they also played in CCL during the midweek. TFC, they haven't played since that win against the Union, so they're definitely going to be more fresh coming into this game, and hopefully maybe that win will kind of carry them some momentum heading into this game against New England, a team that is definitely beatable because of how the Revs have looked in that last game, and how the Revs definitely look like a team that's probably going to be near the basement this season, but you never know. These 2 teams, I think you could argue both kind of maybe belong in the basement, but for TFC, they want to, if they can get 2 wins to start the season, then maybe they can actually push their way to maybe get a playoff spot, and especially the fact that they finally got Buzuelo, who is not going to be playing in this game, but he will, I think, arrive with TFC at the end of March and start playing in the beginning of April. That's when TFC maybe will start to get going. Next up, Colorado. They play against Sporting KC, and actually this is the final game of this Sunday. As, of course, the Rapids, they drew 1 game and lost 1 game, while Sporting KC have won 1 game and lost 1 game, but they did beat Independiente doing this midweek 3-0 in a very stressful kind of game. Sporting KC, of course, besides that win against Independiente, they did beat Philly at home, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. And Colorado, of course, lost 2-0 against Seattle away. And for the Rapids, this is definitely a good test for them. I mean, you know, when you look at this team, I think when you look at these first 2 games, they definitely have shown some improvement, that they are a little bit better than last season. But in terms of the injuries and suspension, Colorado won't have Courtney Ford for this game, so at least one of their center back is still not back with them. And you know, losing Courtney Ford is very big for them, because they don't really have a lot of good kind of center back depth. And you saw last week when both of their center backs just got took out, they had to pretty much play the same center back that they did last year, and that did not work out very well, did it? In terms of the questionable for them, Nicholson and Tommy Smith is questionable for this game. For SKC, Madranda is going to be out for this game, and the questionable guy that is going to be for this game is going to be Fontas. And for Sporting KC, it will also be interesting to see whether Peter Vermees decided to go with the same strong starting 11 that he did in that game against Independiente. I'm assuming he might rest some of his guys, but he is playing against a Colorado team that, as I mentioned, this is a Colorado team that you should not take very lightly. And I know this time it won't be snowing, or at least I actually didn't check the weather yet, but I'm assuming it's probably not going to be snowing like the first game of the season against Portland. And yeah, this team is definitely could be a team that could maybe snatch a point or get all 3 points against a good team. But like I said, this is probably a good test for Colorado to see if they have really improved. I mean, in some way, I don't expect them to really get a win in this, because they're playing against a Sporting KC side that is one of the best team in the league. But at the same time, they want to kind of put a effort that they did against Seattle, except not give up 2 goals so soon and not just go down so easily in the game, so that they have to basically chase the game. And that's been kind of the case in the first 2 games, where Colorado, their defense is still kind of a little bit iffy, and that they had to chase the game most of the time. And although this year they definitely have the attacking piece to chase the game and able to get a goal, unlike in years past, still, Colorado really need to not just concede so early and not just fall behind, and that they have to play catch up. And if they do have to play catch up against Sporting KC, I don't see how they are going to come back in this game. But yeah, either way, that is pretty much it for all 12 of these games. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of these games, and make sure you guys leave your prediction below for all these 12 games. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.